Welcome, everyone, to the Trailhead DX conference. Today, we're going over identity management across Salesforce orgs and how you manage identity across it. My name is Mahesh Sabnani. I'm part of the ISV and App Exchange team. My role is all about helping partners build successful apps on our platform. I'm co-presenting today with Itzik Koren. He's with our product management team. I'll let him introduce himself and take it away from here.
Hey, I'm Itzik Koren, product management. My team is responsible for building different authentication and identity services. That includes the UI login, API login, things like OAuth, single sign-on, two-factor authentication, and other security controls that we have around the login process. So this is the agenda for today. We're going to start with describing some of the challenges of managing user identities, credentials, access control in a multi-cloud environment. Then we're going to demonstrate how you can use Salesforce Identity to address many of these challenges. Mahesh is going to walk us through a real ISV use case, and he's going to show us how he enabled an ISV to deploy single sign-on user provisioning in a multi-org environment. Then we'll discuss some security best practices, and we'll try to keep about 10 minutes at the end for a Q&A. Before we move on, this is our forward-looking statement. During the session, we may mention features that we plan to release in future releases. So if you plan to make any purchase decisions, please base them only on what is available today. And we all today use different cloud services. If you're sitting here today, I guess that most of you use Salesforce. Some of you probably use more than one Salesforce instance, right? You may use maybe multiple orgs or maybe Salesforce communities or different sandboxes. And I'm quite sure that Salesforce is not the only cloud application that you use, right? I mean, every business today uses any kind of cloud services. It's so much convenient. But if I ask you to pick only one thing that you love most about using all these applications, what it will be?
Any guesses?
What is the one thing that you most love about using all these cloud services? I'll get you. The login process, right? There is nothing that we enjoy more than typing those passwords again, all day long. So if I didn't convince you about the user experience of passwords, let's talk about security of passwords. Right? I mean, it becomes so much difficult to remember all these passwords today for so many services that what many people ends up doing is they simply create a simple password. Right? These simple passwords are maybe easy to remember, but they are also easy to guess. Now, I know you probably will tell me that many services today follow security best practices, and they require users to create strong passwords, right? Which is much better than creating or using a simple password. The problem is that it now becomes even more difficult to remember those passwords. So what many people end up doing is they simply create one single strong password. We call it a master password, and they use it across all their different services, right? We even noticed that many users use their corporate strong password against their or using their personal cloud services. Now, the problem with this approach is that once your credential gets compromised to one service, the attacker or the bad guys can immediately gain access to all your other services. Now, let's talk about administrators. If you are a Salesforce administrator, how do you manage access rights, user credentials to all your users across all the different applications? Identity and access management has always been a challenge for organizations. But in the past, at least it was a very focused problem, right? In the past, everything used to live in one place. All the business services, devices, data, everything lived in the corporate network, right, behind the firewall. So, for example, when an employee left the company, right, as soon as he walked out of the door, he immediately lost access to the corporate network, and with that, he also lost access to the business resources. And today, of course, with the cloud, this paradigm is no longer valid, right? Today, every business uses different kind of cloud services that they don't necessarily own, right? I mean, you, for example, you use Salesforce, you use Google. You may own the data, but you don't own the service themselves. In addition, we want to allow our users, right, our employees, maximum flexibility, right? So we want to allow users to log in from anywhere, not only from the corporate network, but also from a customer side or from home. And on top of that, we also want to allow users to log in from any device, not only corporate issue devices, but also we want to allow our users to check their email, corporate email from their personal mobile device. And the fact is that many companies today struggle with delivering the right access to the right people in the right time. And that, of course, has a security implication. And it also has impact the user experience or the productivity of our users, of our employees. And this is exactly where Salesforce Identity can help you to address many of these challenges. Salesforce Identity is essentially an identity and access management that runs on top of the platform. So it's fully integrated into our platform. If you are an existing Salesforce customer, you already have access to all these services. And what it does, it allows you to build a single view of your users across all their application, all their resources, not only Salesforce resources, but also other cloud services. So you can deliver better services to your users, and you can also have better security or better control. So now we're going to switch to a demo. We're going to show you some identity capabilities. This demo is going to focus on the end user experience, right? So we're going to show you how you can use Salesforce Identity to provide better user experience to your users, your Salesforce users. So in this demo, let's pretend that I'm a sales rep. I need to connect to my Salesforce org and do some work. So this is, first thing I'm going to do is I go to the login page. Now, as you can notice, this login page looks slightly different from the standard login page. This is my domain login page. My domain means that you can register your own Salesforce domain. So if you look here, you can see this is fixcoffee.my.salesforce.com. Once you do that, that allows you to start customize the login experience, right? As you can see, you can customize the background color, there may be the logo, and you can also assign different single sign-on capabilities, right? So if you scroll down or if you look here, you can notice that I have 2 different single sign-on buttons. That means that user can now log in with 2 different identity providers, okay? Identity providers, or IDP, is essentially a service that allows you to manage all your user credentials, all your user identities in one place. It also provides you single sign-on services. So now let me click on one of these single sign-on. And as you can see, I am, instead of entering my Salesforce credential, I basically get redirected to this IDP, Identity Provider Login page. In this case, we are using Identity Connect. Identity Connect is another Salesforce Identity product. It's an on-prem service that allows you to connect your Active Directory credentials with Salesforce. So in this case, users don't need to maintain 2 different sets of credentials. They can log into Salesforce using their network or their Active Directory credentials. Okay? But for this demo, I'm going to log in slightly different. I'm going back to the login page, and I'm going to show you the Lightning login feature. Lightning login essentially is a passwordless login. It's using the Salesforce Authenticator mobile app. Here on the right, you can see this is my phone. Okay, it's live. And what I'm going to do now, I'm going to enter my credentials, my username. Okay, as you can see, I leave the password field blank, log in. And if you look here now to the right, you can see that I just got this notification request opening up the Salesforce Authenticator. You can see that this verification request is popping up. Here I can review different details about this login attempt, right? I can see who is the user that is trying to log in, from what device, from what location. And if I don't recognize this activity, I can tap to deny and immediately block access to my org. But if I do recognize it, I can just tap to approve here. And as you can see, I'm also required to provide a fingerprint for additional security. If you have iPhone X, you can use your Face ID. So let's scan my fingerprint. As you can see, I'm automatically, immediately logging into my org, no password. So that's basically Lightning Login two-factor authentication. Okay, two-factor authentication is the most effective way to protect user identities. Okay, if an attacker managed to get my credentials, you still need to get access to my phone, right? That's the first factor, and you also need to have access to my fingerprint, right? It's possible, but more difficult. So now I'm connected to my org. I can go update some CRM records. At some point, I need to sign a document and send to my client. So I need to access my Dropbox account. One way to do that, I can just go to the Dropbox login page, again, enter Dropbox credentials, or I can just go to the app launcher, going to this waffle icon. Sorry, wrong one, this one. And from here, I can just single sign on to Dropbox. This app launcher essentially is a single sign-on portal. Here, every user can find all the different applications that basically the admin org authorized me to use, right, based on my profile, based on my role, or maybe other criteria. And from here, I can single sign on to each one of these applications. As you can see, you can list different types of application. Some of them are what we call third-party application, things like Google, Concur, Workday. Other type of application are maybe another Salesforce application. And you can also host a proprietary application. So basically, every application that supports one of the standard single sign-on application can be easily integrated here. Let's click on the Dropbox. And as you can see now, immediately single sign-on into my Dropbox account. Again, I don't need to remember another set of password. I don't need to remember even the different URL. This app launcher is basically API exposed, right? This is the default view. If you don't like it, you want to customize it, you have full access to the API. You can completely customize it. Mesh is going to show us a different flavor of app launcher in this demo. Keep in mind that I showed you single sign-on into Salesforce. That was inbound single sign-on. In this case, we do basically outbound single sign-on, right? So in this case, Salesforce is acting as an IDP, providing single sign-on services to other applications. We basically enable this using the Connected App Framework. Connected App Framework basically allows you to connect external application into Salesforce for a variety of different reasons. Could be for API integration, could be for inbound or outbound integration. So now, just to finish this demo, I'm going to log out for my org. And this portion of the demo is invisible. So what I did, I just log out from Salesforce org, but behind the scene, we also automatically send logout requests to all the other service providers that are connected to this org. This is enabled by the single logout feature. Okay, so single logout feature is basically in a single sign-on environment. Logging out from one entity should invoke logout to all the other entities. Let's go back to the slides. So in this short demo, we demonstrated some of these capabilities. At the end of the session, we're going to share with you some resources and documentation so you can go and find more about each one of these features. The two ones that are highlighted here, Mesh is going to cover in details in his demo, okay? And with that, I'll hand it over to Mesh to share with us the ISV use case.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Itzik, for that great introduction into all things identity. I now want to talk about some concepts that Itzik talked about and kind of build upon those using an ISV use case. So we're talking about an ISV in the oil and gas industry here. This is a fictional ISV, but it's based on a real-world problem. So I want to give you a little bit of background on this ISV first. So let's call this ISV GenCom. They're in the oil and gas industry, and they're all about taking old-school operational processes that happen on oil rigs and automating those processes, pen and paper processes. And they have lots of different oil rigs, which are their customers that they support. And all these customers have lots of different workers on those oil rigs. They're all transient workers. There's thousands of them, right? And for the purpose of this example, we're going to focus on the vendors, which are like independent contractors. Each of those vendors need to have access to each instance of the GenCom solution running locally at that oil rig. So they go from customer to customer. There's a kiosk or console on site where the vendor goes up and he will log in with his single set of credentials. And the requirement here is they want these credentials that he signs up with and he gets to be transposable to any customer site that he goes to. So he can use the same credentials going from site to site. Now, all these customer orgs are not connected together, and the console that's on site at each of the customers is controlled by physical security for the purpose of this example. In real life, you can control that access of that vendor or that user to the console using restricted IPs, validation rules, approval processes, and a number of other things. But we're just going to simplify the example here using physical security. And then the last requirement here is all about user provisioning. So not only do we want them to be able to register, but in each of the customer orgs, they need to be provisioned automatically into those customer orgs as well. And everything linked back to their centralized login. Okay? So we looked at a number of different identity management patterns. And this is an approach that some of you may be familiar with. It's kind of the hub and spoke model, right? So the hub org in this case is where they would log in, kind of a centralized login with one set of credentials. And that would allow them access to these spoke orgs or subscriber orgs where the solutions are actually running. These are on the customer orgs themselves. So they'll use one set of credentials, and then they'll use a certificate combined with connected apps to be able to seamlessly move to these spoke orgs as well. And just to level set what's happening here, the hub org is your trusted provider, or your IDP, as Itzik has mentioned. So this is the part where you would log in, and then once you log into this one place, you're trusted across all the other spoke orgs as well. And your spoke orgs are your service providers or your customer orgs that would be running your application. So that's just kind of high level so you guys understand. So we kind of looked at these requirements in more detail, and we came up with a solution architecture. And the solution architecture was all about implementation here. So if we look at the solution architecture, we still have this hub org. This is your centralized login org where the vendor logs in. And when he logs into the centralized org, he's automatically dropped into an app launcher. And the app launcher here is built on communities. And this whole org structure is built on communities. So the community template here is the Aloha template. So you can actually just spin it up pretty easily. And he's presented with a couple of different customer orgs or connected apps. So let's say Jim is a vendor that's on site today, and he needs to have access to Prester Drilling. That's one of the customer orgs that you see up there. So he automatically will just select that org, and he's automatically dropped into that org number 2, which is a subscriber org, and he's automatically provisioned into that org as well if he doesn't have a login already. And that would present him with a console where he can then enter his work order details, his case information, anything that he did on the oil rig that day, he could be presented with that, right? So I want to take all of this information I just shared with you kind of as a precursor to the demo. So in the demo, you will see a number of things that we will highlight. We will cover Federation ID and user records and how you can link user records together. We will cover connected apps. We'll talk about single sign-on settings and how to marry that up with connected apps, and the use of the identity provider certificate, as well as we'll talk about just-in-time provisioning. So with that, I'm going to switch over to the demo. Okay, so the hub org that we were talking about before, the community login place, the one place the vendor logs in, this is what you're seeing on screen. He gets to a drilling rig, he gets to a console. Jim has never registered, he's never used GenCom before, he has no idea what this is, but he knows he needs to log in to get access to this customer user, right? So he's going to basically just say, hey, I need to become a member, I need to register. So let's go ahead and register Jim. So we'll just create a username and password for him. And we'll say, and he will try to log in. Okay. And there you go. He's logged into the centralized hub org, and he's presented with a number of different connected apps. These are all the customers of GenCom that he can get access to. He's working on all these different oil rigs. He can sign into any of these. And you can see his name is up on the top right. So you can pull up his profile information. But today he's looking at Prester Drilling. He's working at Prester Drilling. So he's going to click through on Prester Drilling now. So now, just like that, Jim is a new user. Remember, he came to the hub org. He never existed in the customer orgs. He's automatically provisioned and dropped into the customer org. And all that happens using just-in-time provisioning. This is a new user record that has been created on the customer org. It's not like the original user that logged into the main hub org. And I will show you that in a little bit. And then he can enter his case information or any of the shared work orders that you're seeing here. So that's the demo. Now, how does all of this magic happen behind the scenes? So I want to show you guys that, right? So here we have two orgs that we worked off today. One is GenCom, which is the identity provider. This is the hub org. And you can see that with the logo on the top left. And the second one is Prester Drilling. This is the customer org. So if I'm toggling between the two orgs, just look at the logo and you'll know exactly where I am at any point in time. So what was the first thing that Jim did when he came to the console? He registered, right? So his user record needed to be created. So let's see how his user record looks. So here's Jim. He's been created. This is his user record. He's created as a community user. But the thing I want you to pay particular attention to is this thing at the bottom here that I'm highlighting called a Federation ID. This Federation ID in the user record has been written into the user record after the user record has been created. And I did that through an Apex trigger. You can do that through Process Builder or through any other logic you want to do that. But this is a unique string. And I will cover why we do this in a little bit. But just remember that this is a unique string on his original record. Okay? So what was the next thing that he did? After he logged in, he clicked on a connected app and went through, right? So let's look at the connected app in detail. So we go to Manage Connected Apps. Here you see the connected apps here. These are the same connected apps that he saw on the front end when he logged in, right? So these are the connected apps that you saw originally. This is the back end where it's been configured. And 3 of them show up here. You can configure however many you want on that app launcher. But Prester Drilling was the one that he really wanted to work in. So let's look and see how that's set up. So this connected app has a lot of information in it, right? But a couple of things I want you to note is this identity management certificate, identity provider certificate, right? IDP certificate. So when you designated your hub org as an identity provider, you get an option to put a certificate on the connected app and then share that certificate with your service provider as well. So you put that on here, and that will reconcile with a service provider IDP certificate that allows the seamless login. The other thing that you need to note on here, if you scroll down, is custom attributes at the bottom. These are all the different attributes on his user record. So first name, last name, all of Jim's details. We're taking some of those details and we're passing it into the service provider so that we can create a corresponding user record over there, right? So that's what I want you to know. Now, while we still have this connected app open, let's toggle over to the service provider. So we're now in the customer org. And we can quickly take a look and see what the single sign-on settings that map the connected app look like. So here you see the hub org, the URL is right here, so we'll click through on it. And right away, you will see there is the identity provider certificate right here. This is the same matching certificate that I just showed on the connected app that allows that seamless login, right? Along with the other details, the other connected app details. But let's scroll down a little bit more and take a look. What's the other thing that you see that's on here? Just-in-time provisioning has been enabled. That allowed Jim to be created automatically on the fly in the customer org. And I'm using a just-in-time handler, which is an Apex class. I'm using custom version because I want to not use profile ID. I want to use profile name in the handler that was passed over. So I customized it. You can customize it for any number of different reasons. You may want to pass some validation logic in or anything like that, so you may want to customize it. Okay. So what does this handler actually look like? So if we scroll over to the developer console, we can see the handler is up, right? This is the standard handler which I have customized. And here you see this logic that I'm highlighting up here on the screen. This is the federation ID that I talked about at the beginning, right? This federation ID now has been passed over to the subscriber org and is written into the new user record that has been created on that service provider. That's what keeps both of the user records in sync, and that's also what allows them to seamlessly log in. And provided that the connected app, the admin of the service provider and the admin of the identity provider are working together, they can make sure all of these settings are correct so the login happens seamlessly. Now, this Apex class that you're seeing up here is completely packageable. So you can package this and deploy this to any service provider, right, that you want to bring into the fold. So lastly, let's look at this user that was created as Jim. So this is a separate user record from what I showed in the beginning. So now we look at the user record. This is also Jim has been created in this customer org. And note the federation ID is exactly the same, which means that both of those users are linked together. The system will then know if that user already exists with that federation ID, we don't need to provision him. We can just automatically sign him in. And that's how the whole thing really works, right? So let's go back to switch back to the slides. So what did we talk about? Sorry. Okay. So we talked about the user record and the federation ID used on the user record. Then we showed you what the connected apps look like and the corresponding single sign-on settings that went with those connected apps. We talked about the IDP certificate that was put onto the connected app and also onto the service provider or the single sign-on settings. And then we showed you a little bit about just-in-time provisioning, how that all happens seamlessly and use an Apex class to do that, right? So I can't cover all that code today, so I do want to leave you guys with the sample code today. Here's a QR code I'm going to put up on screen. You can point your phones to it. This will take you to the GitHub repository where my code is, and you guys can download it and customize it to your heart's content. I'm going to leave this up while I transition back to ITSIC to cover a few more items. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mash. It's always great to see a real use case implementation of how customers, ISV, use identity services. So just to summarize, today we talked about different challenges of managing identities, credentials, access control in a multi-cloud environment. As I mentioned before, everything is available for you free of charge. So now it's up to you whether to implement some of or all of these identity capabilities based on your use case, needs, resource availability. One thing that we strongly recommend any one of our customers is to follow these security best practices. Now, you don't need to deploy each one of them, but at least make sure that one of them is deployed in your org. We talked about two-factor authentication. We talked about single sign-on. The only one that we didn't mention is a IP restriction. IP restriction basically allows you to restrict access to your org only from a range of IP. It could be your corporate IP, VPN. You can enforce it either directly on the Salesforce org, or you can enforce it on your IDP in case you use a single sign-on. A few words about the future of authentication in Salesforce and in general. We are making more investments in passwordless technologies, especially on the B2C or community side. We also adding more intelligence to our risk-based authentication engine. There are many signals today that you can collect, behavioral signals, environmental signals that you can collect and can help you to estimate the risk of the login process or in general the risk of using the app. There are technologies today that allows you to recognize people by the way they walk or by the way they type on the keyboard. So we want to integrate these capabilities into our risk-based authentication engine. And in general, what we want to try and achieve is basically dramatically reduce the number of times that user needs to interact with our login services. Not because we don't want people to use our login services, because we want to be smarter, we want to be able to make all these decisions in the background. So picture a world where you sign up for a new service, you go and log in only once, even then you log in without password, and then we keep you in the app forever. And basically on the background we can constantly estimate the risk, and only if there is a risk, right, we can challenge you again to verify your identity. So that's the vision. And with that, I get to the Q&A section. So we're opening up now the stage for questions. There are 2 mics here. These are a list of some useful resources. We have a couple of trailheads that we recommend you to take. Also the implementation guide, identity implementation guide, and the single sign-on implementation guide are very good resources to get started. And we want to thank you today for your time, and we'll start taking questions.
The floor is open for questions.